A knight returning from the Crusades confronts death in a game of chess to forestall his own mortality in Ingrid Bergman's 1957 existential drama, The Seventh Seal. And that's the movie we're dusting off this week on Movie Bones.
När lammet bröt det sjunde inseglet uppstod i himlen en tystnad som varade vid pass en halv timme. Och de 7 änglarna som hade de 7 basunerna gjorde sig redo till att stöta i sina basuner.
Vem är du?
Jag är döden.
Kommer du för att hämta mig?
Jag har redan länge gått vid din sida.
Det vet jag.
Är du beredd?
Min kropp är rädd. Inte jag själv. Vänta ett ögonblick.
Så säger ni alla. Men jag lämnar inga uppskov.
Du spelar ju schack, inte sant?
Ja, jag är verkligen en ganska skicklig schackspelare.
Villkoret är att jag får leva så länge jag står dig emot. Spelar jag dig matt, friar du mig.
Well, for those of you who are in the audio-only version of the podcast, that is the Scandinavian version of a knight coming back from the Crusades and challenging death to a game of chess, which I instantly recognized from another movie in a different context. One from when I was younger. If you guys have seen Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, clearly they were inspired by Bergman and that was, I have to say, the best part. I mean, it rubbed off a little bit because for me, that was the best part of Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. It was seeing them play death. This is a very intellectual film, is it not?
Oh yeah, highly intellectual. If you're a fan of philosophy, if you're a fan of existentialism, existentialist thoughts, you will like this movie. This can push you in that direction. This movie is very much designed to make you think. It is there to entertain you, but it is also absolutely there to make you think. And that's kind of like its first and foremost job, it feels like.
It is kind of like the secular version of trying to make you really focus on the ramifications of death. I mean, we've seen, it's not like death is something that's alien to a lot of the films we've seen. It's present in more than, I don't even know how many of our films deal with death on at least some partial level, even if it's just silly. But it's like, in this movie, it's like the secular version of taking death as its own subject. It's like forcing the audience to come to terms with their own mortality. And in a very kind of, as you said, existentialist kind of way, you could almost, in a way, you do a double feature between this movie and The Trial. And it would be, if you can stand it, if you can stand it, you're probably like Wednesday Addams or something, from the Addams Family. That's probably what it would take to do a double feature back to back. Because this is heavy stuff. I mean, it's not just philosophically heavy. It's confronting your own mortality is in itself, there's nothing more, sombering, or should be at least, than confronting the fact that, yes, you are going to die. And you can't just, plague death. And James Kirk from Star Trek II quoted it as like he's cheated death, but he never really confronted it until Star Trek. You see him in that scene in Star Trek II when it's like, and that's really what Star Trek II is about in a way too, but in a much more action-adventure-y kind of setting. But yeah, it's that confrontation with death. It's heavy stuff. No doubt about it.
Beautiful thing about this movie, though, I say beautiful, I'm kind of being very tongue-in-cheek when I say that. We don't actually know why they're dying.
You could say it's a Black Death, but...
I mean, I think that's probably the reason. We have our 2 characters, Knight Block, that's his actual name, by the way. Like, he's sitting there, he's talking a bit about his life, but he's not talking to anyone, and then Death shows up, he understands who it is, and then he says, let's have a chess game for my life. And then that's the movie. Like, the movie doesn't sit there and watch them have a chess match, but What the movie is it's intermingled with these, these interrelations with different characters that they come across as they travel to Nightblock's castle, which is, a couple days, weeks off from where the movie begins. And as the movie goes on, like you have these moments with him and Death, and you only have like one other character who can see Death and, in that sense, not be affected by Death like that. Yeah. And again, this movie is just like it's Nightblock's journey through trying to find understanding in the cosmos, understanding in faith, understanding in what it means to be alive and what it means to die. And you have different characters that are just with him on that journey. Yeah. It doesn't mean that they don't take an active role in it, but they are with him on that journey.
And those other characters are very critical, I think, to the level of depth the film is able to achieve with its subjects, because it's merciless. It's not trying to pigeonhole any one group. Even it's like religion gets skewered here. And Ryan and I say that as people of faith. We're both Christians of different denominations, but it doesn't feel like it's going after religion specifically. It's an equal opportunity offender, because just whether you're religious or not, there's plenty of stuff going on that it just is meant to show you that death comes for everybody, That's my take on that part of it, at least. And every one of those characters has an interesting, different take on it, too.
Yeah, and I agree that it's not coming at, religion. It's not coming at Christianity as a whole. The critique of religion in this movie comes down to certain things like the showmanship of religion, the theatrics of religion. There's this one scene where two of our main characters of the film, make sure I get their names right. I think it's Yoff,
I think,
and Mia. I think those are the two characters, Yoff and Mia. And there's another character. I think it's Marion or Karen. When they are performing a show, like all of a sudden you have this, ceremony of sorts. It's marching people through town that are sinners, that are, lamenting of their sin. And then like at the very end of it, you've got like the crucified Christ statue that is walking through. And it is there to show that this is a critique of religion as a whole. And again, I'm not talking about, yes, it is using Christianity, and there's a reason why it's using Christianity. Mostly it's because that is what Bergman is from. He was a son of a Lutheran pastor, or Lutheran priest. But like it's not there to say, oh, this is a bad thing. It's there to say this is what it can be. Like, if you're not careful, this is definitely what it can be, because it is. It's as theatrical, if not more, than our acting chirp.
Self-flagellation was a thing. I think it probably during the Black Death in the Middle Ages. It's like people thought this is because of our sins, and they would whip themselves with the cat of nine tails, just like, and it's like ripping flesh off their bodies. When people think of whips, they think of like Indiana Jones whips. It's like, no, this is like, with things that tear at the flesh when it strikes the body attached to the ends. And so it's like, and they're doing this to themselves. The priest who's leading I guess it's a priest or a brother religious, he's really laying it on thick. He's Mr. like, you can't enjoy anything in life. It's your duty to be miserable, almost. There's no sense of hope or joy to be found. It's like, so it's like he's pinning it all in the afterlife, which, look, if you're a Christian, that's the end goal. But it's like, it doesn't mean that you can't enjoy things right now, or shouldn't have a positive attitude even in the middle of darkness. But there was so much darkness too. The kind of caricature he's portraying is real, though, and I will give it that. So he's doing justice to that kind of trope.
Coming at that character and that kind of way of thinking is what Squire Johns is in this movie, partly in this movie for. He is the humanity, the true humanist in this movie. He's like, he doesn't exist like as a devil on Nightblock's shoulder, but he does kind of go through this movie with this atheistic approach to it. And there's a reason for the atheistic approach that he has, or the atheistic thoughts that he has at that point. This is what really fascinates me about this movie and other types of movies that are set in this time period and books that are set in this time period. And that is, this is set in medieval Europe. There's this weirdness to the Crusades. And that's what this is coming right off the back of, is the Crusades. I don't know if I'm just saying that, but every piece of media that I have ever scene about the Crusades, oftentimes there's this like, again, there's this weirdness to it. I don't think it's just because, the Crusades were about like just a completely different form of Christianity than was originally intended. But there's just always this kind of weirdness to the Crusades. Like if you ever seen the movie The Kingdom of Heaven, there's this fantastic scene in the Kingdom of Heaven. It is a fantastic scene where you have the main character played by Orlando Bloom. He's defending a stronghold of Jerusalem. They have a skirmish with some Muslims. At the end of that skirmish, there's like this understanding that like the bigger army's on its way. Saladin's army is on its way, and it shows up while he's talking to another character who is also a Muslim, but he gets along with. Then, and all of a sudden, like in the background, you just start to see it. And this is like the best shot in the movie, and it's a beautifully shot movie. You see the cross, like the cross that they've created and everything. And then like you hear like Jerusalem has come, and then it's just like this massive army. I always like get this odd feeling of awe because there is some weirdness to it. Like you just brought out, you can't really tell during this scene, but it is there because it's actually there throughout the movie with this particular cross. But there are priests of sorts on the cross, like it's because it's on a base.
Oh, really?
There are priests of sorts that are on the cross. There's an oddness to it, and I know I'm just kind of going on right now, but it's the same thing here. You see that weirdness in this text or in this movie. However, there's this other thing that happens to the Crusades, and that is you actually do have a loss of faith amongst people who were actually a part of the Crusades. The things that you're called to do, the things that you had to do, the things that you did do, and it's all said, well, you're going to go to heaven if you do these things. But it's like all the things that they did is like, why would God ever let anybody like that into heaven?
Exactly.
And you get that through John's. That's the thing. So you get it through John's. John's like, there cannot be God for what we did.
I mean, you're making me think right now of I listened to a podcast a little while ago about the sack of Constantinople. And Constantinople is obviously it's not Jerusalem, but it was related to these events because one of the Crusades left, and along the way they suffered some trials and tribulations along the way. One of the gang spoke up and said that he was someone who was important enough. He was the rightful heir to the throne in Constantinople and the Eastern Roman Empire, and because of that, it's like, if you take me there and I'll give you all the treasure. You put me back on the throne, I'll give you all the treasure. And this is part of the Crusades. This is supposed to be a crusade, right? But he puts them on the side journey to Constantinople, and they go raiding and pillaging and raping the people there. And they even steal like the gold from the doors of the churches in the Eastern Orthodox Church. It becomes one of the wedge issues that forms a schism between the Eastern Rite Church and the Roman Catholic Church at the time. Because of that, this is clearly not intended by anything in Christianity. It shouldn't have even been done in the first place. It's like, it really isn't the idea of religion to play a political force in these things. But when it does, you get mired in all the extra secular kind of weighted down stuff. You get weighted down in all the sin of the world at once, because that's what war does. It's every bad thing in the world happening at once. You name it. It unleashes a Pandora's box of sin, unlike anything else you see. And you can see it even in modern day wars too. Soldiers go too far. They lose control of themselves, especially, if it's less disciplined. It's like it unleashes this kind of moral nothing matters. And when you see enough of that and you tie it to religion, well, guess what's going to happen? This, it's not surprising.
All that brings about the issue in this movie, or one of the issues in this movie. And I say it's one of the issues because I'm not like, I look at Night Block and I'm like, he doesn't necessarily, he's not really losing his faith. He's trying to get his faith to overcome death. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. He doesn't seem to understand that, he wants to have faith, but also not have to undergo death at the same time. Yeah.
It's that his faith should be able to, exactly what you said, is his faith should be able to stave death off. And just in the end, and this kind of gets into the end of the movie, in the end, you discern that death comes for everyone, regardless of what you're thinking, regardless of your faith, regardless of what you're feeling. It just is what it is.
Yeah. Even if he were to manage to win, it's like, let's say he won against death in this game. You think death is going to go away forever? You think you're going to be immortal now? That's not the way it works, dude.
He could have beat death in a chess match, but again, at some point, he still has to go with death.
I guess this is one of the really great things about the movie. It touches on so many thoughts of other kind of movies. Now, all of a sudden, you're making me think of Groundhog Day, because there's a movie in which you had a guy who was literally invincible. He had cheated death without even wanting to. And yet the thing is that once he tries on immortality, he realizes its limitations and the cost of it. This is I think it might have been based on a short story or a novel. I'm not sure. But I have heard there's another version of the story that actually it indicates just how long he was in the time loop in Groundhog Day. And it's unfathomably long. It is unheardably long. It's like, but if you've lived that long, it's like eventually you kind of yearn for death. It's almost like because you're not meant to be living in corporeal physical reality forever. It wears on you. You get to retain all of the things that you've picked up, all the pains and injuries. You don't get to heal, fully from that. So it's like, but anyway, yeah, so it does call to mind a whole bunch of other things that way. So I understood it a lot better than like the trial.
I will say this, there's a bit like, I know people talk about, like, I'm looking at your notes and you're not wrong because I've seen other people talk about it. There's a bit of like a cynicism to this movie. There is a bit of nihilism to this movie. However, there is a bit of absurdism to this movie as well.
Oh, yeah.
It's a hint of it, but maybe, not like absurd like the trial is. This trial is absurd as in like, it's crazy. I'm talking about the philosophy of absurdism, like, and which is kind of like, mired in that kind of, thought, but, like something's crazy, but there's a reason for it to be crazy. There's a little bit of that in this movie in that, like, especially right there, I wouldn't say, well, I'll say especially right there at the end, from a visual standpoint and just also kind of the philosophical standpoint, again, it's absurd what you want to do because you can't stop it from happening. Like, you just can't stop it from happening. Now, you can do certain things to delay it for reasons, which he does, but that's his folly in this movie is he doesn't really look at it that way. He looks at it like, maybe he can actually win the game. Yeah,
he does.
So,
and on the point of absurdity, I will say that visually, getting back to the movie itself in terms of the cinematography, just some of the choices by the director in terms of how to portray things. When it comes to the death of, I think it's, let's see, is it the actor who runs off with the other woman and he's caught?
Yes.
And then she goes back to her husband, and then he's off in a tree. He climbs up a tree, and I'm like, and this is his moment of death, and death comes in, and it's like, the tree, you climbed up the wrong tree, pal. This tree's about to fall. But the way it falls is that death is actually there with a saw cutting it, and he's having a conversation trying to talk death down from what he's doing. And it's like, that just, it's one of those pieces, like, it's kind of tragic still, but it's so funny at the same time. It kind of encapsulates
some of the
best. It's hilarious. It encapsulates something really special about the movie. I do love those touches of absurdism actually woven into the direction of the film itself. It gives you a little bit of levity that is very needed. I'll have to say that it's in a movie like this very needed.
Well, that whole subplot is in and of itself is kind of absurd. You have the drunk. Oh, he's a smith, right? Yeah, he's a drunk smith. And he's drunk because his wife ran off with his wife ran off with one of these actors. And then they meet back up with him and he's like, I'm going to take you out. And then like she completely lies to his face and he's like, I wasn't actually going to go with him. And he's like, all right, I believe you. And it's just so, it's very wild and crazy and absurd there. And then that little subplot, like Justin's already said, it ends with the actor in a tree waiting to get sawed down by death, which is, again, that's just, it's
and nobody misses him.
Perfectly put, perfectly placed, and yet just seemingly out of place at the same time.
You ready for a wrap up? Are you ready to give your verdict?
Yeah, I think I'm ready for it. I'll just add something else in that verdict because I think it's just neat, kind of weird. But I'll let you go first.
Okay. Yeah, it's hard to say I like a movie that dwells so much on kind of, a lot of really heavy stuff like this. A similar problem I had with The Trial. Existentialism in film, even at its best, and this is, I'll say, at its best, it still kind of leaves you feeling a little off by the end. And it's probably by design, that's intentional. That said, the performances are outstanding. The style of the film, from its pacing and cinematography, they're truly some really unique and really good and interesting ways. And the ideas are interesting it plays with, too. In many key ways, it is Fortune and Glory. But the practical result for me is that it belongs in a museum. And I'm saying feel here very strongly, because it's like, I will watch this again, but it's not going into my library as something I have to have in my library. It's just a really good film that it makes me feel weird when I'm by the end of it, and it's worth revisiting. But but yeah, that's where I'm at. It's in a museum, but in a very good way.
So there's one of the final scenes of the film is they all go back to his castle, about all of them, like all the characters that are still with Night Block, and like at the castle is his wife. And like his wife is like, she's got a significant role in this movie, but she's only in there for like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, maybe at tops. And they're all talking, and then like they're eating, and then all of a sudden Death shows up, and everybody except Night Block is able to accept Death. Night Block is, everyone's like, I'm ready to go. I'm okay with going. Night Block is praying and praying and praying. And then like it cuts to like a little bit later on, because you saw this earlier in the film, but you only saw a picture of it. Later on, you see Death just walking. He's walking along the hillside, and he's holding a hand and just walking with, and all the other characters are walking. It's a recreation of the picture, The Dance of Death. And so they're all like walking very jaggedly, it's very odd. And it capped this movie for me in the way that like, it's very melancholy. However, I also found it to be very powerful. I'd go watch that scene I'd go watch that scene just because I guess it's very, very macabre. This is a heavy movie. Like this is, Justin's already said, there's no doubt in my mind. There's just no doubt. This is a heavy movie. It's meant to be a heavy movie. But I found myself connected to Block in many ways, just kind of thinking about the things that he's thinking about as the movie goes on. Now, that being said, there's a lot of this movie that I actually disagree with on a philosophical and spiritual level, but I do believe this movie posits some pretty good thinking things, or some pretty good things to think about anyways. Along with that, cinematography, acting, and themes of this movie, they're just so wonderfully done. They're wonderfully paced. It is weird, but it's just so wonderfully made, wonderfully built movie. I do think it would bring people back to explore different parts of it. I'm not saying like I would go back and watch it right away, but I can also see why this movie might not be other people's cups of tea, because maybe you don't want to think about that. And I think it's perfectly fine if you want to ignore that kind of stuff. This movie has had apparently books written about it, longer videos than what we're doing right now, a longer podcast talking about it. And yeah, all of that for me is to say, this is absolutely a Fortune and Glory. This is right up my alley as in terms of philosophical. I love talking about it. I love thinking about it. Like just philosophy, that is. I love it. So it's a Fortune and Glory for me. And I do think all the other things, the cinematography, the acting, the story itself is enough for Fortune and Glory.
That's our show for this week. As always, Ryan and I like to invite you that if you're having a good time listening to us talk about and uncover and dig up these old movies together, please do like and subscribe and comment. And of course, follow us in your podcast purveyor of choice. Let us know what you think we got wrong. We're imperfect human beings. We can be wrong about stuff. And of course, let us know about a few titles you'd like us to see cover on future episodes. Actually, we have a special next week because this is the end of the second season of Movie Bones. So what a way to end it, on an existentialist film. So, but this is our last episode for the second season, which means that we're about to start our third season of Movie Bones. But in between, we're going to do a special episode. We're going to do a recap episode. We're going to play some fun games. Just join us to have some fun. So please do join us for that celebration. We're going to recover all our favorite moments, our worst moments, and everything in between. So in any case, thank you very much, folks. Ryan, you got anything to add to that? This is the end of the season.
Join us on this journey.
Yes. It's been a fun journey. I've had a terrific time these 2 years. It's been terrific.
Yes.
All right, folks. Well, we'll see you next week for our celebration. And folks out there, I'll see you next week. And Ryan, I'll see you next week, okay?
See you next week.
All right, folks. Bye-bye.
Varför säger du tyst?